without further ado, are you ready?
Sure.
Yeah. All right, so Andy Schmidt, he's one of the leaders in the comic book industry, teacher,
writer, editor.
Okay, everything in the comic book industry. He's the founder of Comics Experience, which is a great way to learn about the comic industry, how to get into it, how to create for it. And without stealing any more thunder, I'm going to hand the mic over to him.
Thank you. Thank you. And sorry, I'm late. Can you guys hear me in the back? Is it okay? Good? All right. Just up and running here. Let's see if I get this right. So are most of you students? Working professionals? Making art, being creative, right? Okay. That's good. Just want a slideshow. Wait for it.
Whoa.
Whoa. One thing I found about being creative is good transitions make a really crafty presentation. Oh, look, there's a remote there. Cool. I'll go first. So, is it on? All right.
Everything's working out.
Another remote control right here.
Human remote.
So we're going to talk about sort of turning on creativity. I only have 20 minutes, so I'm not used to giving 20-minute talks. I'm used to giving hour-long or 2-hour-long talks, so hopefully I won't make this too long. So the idea here is sort of being creative when you're not feeling it, and how do you start doing that? Now, I'm sort of doing a story-focused version of this. I would be happy to do an art-focused version as well. Do we have any sort of writers or people working on story? Okay, good. So this will be helpful for like 4 of you. That's good. That's a good percentage. But a lot of what we're going to talk about really is valuable and useful for painting, illustration art, film, any of that sort of stuff too. So hopefully you'll be able to make that leap in your mind as we go. And of course we've got a Q&A once the talk is done, and we can get into that too. So I wanted to start with a very brief sort of overview of kind of how I view creativity. And I basically boil it down to sort of this combination of 3 things. The first is talent. A lot of the images you'll see in here are from comic books, because that's what I usually do. So talent is something that I absolutely believe everybody has. What I tend to do with my teaching and Comics Experience and that sort of stuff is help people kind of figure out where their talent comes from and where their talent sort of lies, and then how do you go about releasing that talent and getting it out and then shaping what may be a raw idea or a raw image in your mind. How do you wind up shaping that and crafting it into a piece of art, into a story, that kind of thing. So I really do believe that everybody has talent, so that's nice, because we got that one down. Where I come from, professionalism helps. And professionalism, if you're gonna, how many of you are gonna do freelance work or are doing freelance work? Yeah. Okay. So professionalism is a really, really helpful thing for you because a lot of people doing freelance work don't have a lot of it. So this is one place where you can get like a leg up on everybody else, which is things like meeting your deadlines, responding to emails or phone calls. I mean, all of that falls under professionalism. But also a big part of professionalism is doing the work even when you're not inspired, right? Does this happen to you guys? You guys have all been like in art school? I remember in sculpture class when I was in college, they had us do like a found sculpture thing where we were supposed to find whatever little things around for like, we had a week to do it. I wasn't feeling it. So 5 minutes before class began, I was at the cafeteria, still not feeling it, and I picked up 5 forks and quickly designed them into sort of a star shape and brought it in and plugged it up on the wall when I got there. And somehow, I managed to rattle off like this bizarre, winging it thing about what it meant. At least a C+ on that. Inspiration. a lot of artists, a lot of creative people, a lot of writers are waiting for inspiration. When it comes to artists, sometimes it's looking at other art. Sometimes it's just looking at the world around you. I mean, inspiration comes from anywhere, right? The news. I get inspired by the news. Afraid, also, but sometimes inspired by the news. So inspiration is the sort of most elusive part of this. It's the thing that is hardest to wrangle and sort of get control over, right? How many of you are like, I'm not feeling inspired today. I'm going to go get inspired. Does that work, typically? It does for me, sometimes. So it really becomes a question of, can we turn creativity on? I woke up today, I got into my car, I thought I had plenty of time to get here. I didn't. I'm new to New England. Didn't understand how traffic worked here, or doesn't. And by the time I got here, you know, I was pretty pumped this morning to come in and talk. By the time I got here, I was angry at the bagel truck in front of me. They cut me off. And then you get in here, part of being a professional is getting in and getting to work and getting it done. So the idea of turning creativity on really is about turning on your professionalism, turning on your talent, and finding that inspiration. We've already touched on professionalism already. Professionalism is the will to make yourself get to work, to make yourself create, right? So what we want to really talk about is sort of inspiration, calling your muse. And again, in story terms, for people writing stories, that kind of thing, crafting stories, we call that writer's block. Have you ever met a writer who's having a bout of writer's block? It's like the most miserable, depressing thing ever. Because they have literally like a blank screen. It's just a white screen with an open Word document. And they're just looking at it. And the blinker, you know, the cursor, it just taunts you. Taunts you. I dare you to write something. So one of the things that I try to do is I try to be strategic in things that I'm doing, because I've got 2 kids, I've got a day job, I've got comics experience. I don't like wasting other people's time, certainly, but I also don't like wasting my own time. And so I come up with goals. And one is, sometimes you are asked to perform a particular task. My day job at Hasbro is I'm the IP, intellectual property, and sort of story director on the Transformers brand, which means that my job is to help all of our creative partners who create Transformers video games, Transformers comic books, Transformers novels, Transformers animation, all of these people get in the zone, create really cool stuff that actually fits with the brand, which is a fun job. It's pretty cool. But that means I got a lot of goals, and I'm working on a lot of different things. And one of the things I have to do is go, okay, so say Activision, it's a video game company, is going to put out Transformers game in 2025. That's the goal. Now I've got to help them creatively get there. And sometimes that's enough just to get me started, because now I've got a deadline, I've got a mission to accomplish, but what's that thing going to be? What characters are going to be in it? What's it going to be about? All of that stuff matters. So other times, I'm sitting there or I'm talking with somebody and they bring up some sort of, you know, odd toy or whatever that they played with as a toy, as a kid that they liked. I remember one of my favorites as a kid that like nobody's heard of is called Sectars, which were like giant, ugly insects that parents hated. And then you had cool dudes with like exo armor that rode on top of them. Toy line did not work because parents did not like buying really realistic giant spiders. Imagine that. Anyway, I thought Sectars was cool, and I was in a conversation one day talking about Sectars and with another guy at work, and that produced an idea of, okay, back in 1984, that's what Sectars was. What would it look like today? And just the idea of that, the idea of maybe bringing back this old dead brand, was enough to sort of set me down, and I started writing. And one of the reasons I wrote something on that, and I only spent 20 minutes, Hasbro guys, on this, was just to get it out of the way so I could get back to the thing that was real. But sometimes you just get an idea from somewhere. Conversation, again, news, TV shows, wherever you get these ideas from, but they become the goal. And sometimes you just want to create. Most of you are in art school now, is that right? And I'm imagining that if you are my boss, I'll tell you about my boss, Aaron, great guy. He can't sit, and so we have these like awesome, really awesome corporate jobs, which means we sit in meetings all day long. And anyway, so he can't not draw. Went to art school, but he's an artist. He goes home, he does art, he does all this cool stuff for his daughter. She's very lucky that she has like very cool art design things on her door and all over the house. And he will sit there in meetings and is constantly drawing Batman. Often Batman. Transformers, whatever, or a lot of fantasy sort of stuff, and drawing fairies and monsters, all kinds of stuff. He's sitting there, he's absorbing the conversation, but he's got that itch. He's got to be creating, he's got to be doodling at all times. I'm very afraid that I'll get fired if I do that. He has more clout than I do. But sometimes you just have to create. Which gets to our question. When you have a goal, when you have something you need to do, where do you start? And again, I'm skewing very much on story at this point, so I'm going to sort of back off from the art side. But for story, most people start with characters. One of the reasons I like this image is because, first of all, I like the movie, Usual Suspects, but I like this image because you've got 5 guys up there who are fairly unique looking. They all have, for the most part, a different silhouette. They've got different heights, which you can tell because it's actually listed. You have different color schemes, so they find ways to pop the characters out, and it shows that even though you basically, somebody said, I want a poster of 5 guys standing there facing the audience, they found a way to make that work and to make their characters feel unique, which is pretty important. Because you start with a character in a story. And every character, I'll put it this way, every character of any importance in your story needs a goal. And the goal is driven by the motivation. So the goal typically needs to be achievable, it needs to be definable and achievable. So that when you're getting into a story, as an audience member, you need to know that Indiana Jones, in the scene shown here, is just trying to get that gold head thing. I forget what it's called. Anybody know what that thing was called?
Golden Idol. The fertility idol.
The fertility idol. That was it? They didn't give it a name? Throw me the idol, I'll throw you the whip? Okay. So there's a goal. He's either going to achieve that goal or not. He's either going to get the idol or not get the idol, and by the end of, in this case, the end of the sequence, that needs to be definitive. Does he get the idol? Anyone remember?
Nope.
Ultimately, no. I believe it was taken by Beloche. Okay. So he needs a goal, definable, and the goal, then you go back to your character and go, okay, well then why does my character want the item? And that's where motivation comes from. You can also do this the other way. You can start with a motivation and then figure out what the definable goal is. But often it is done too. So, and the motivation is the reason that I want to achieve that goal. It's not enough just to say Indiana Jones wants an idol. You kind of have to figure out why he wants the idol, right? How many of you just wake up in the morning and decide you want an idol? Anybody? Now that I've said it, I kind of like the idea. I think I'm going to try and get an idol tomorrow. But you need a motivation. In his case, he's an archaeologist. He is a finder of rare antiquities. Clearly likes adventure. And doesn't like what? Snakes. Does not like snakes. And why is that important from designing a character standpoint? Because you have to have a goal, and you also have to have something you fear. You have to have something keeping you from your goal. So what they do in this film is they set up early on in this sequence that he doesn't like snakes because the pilot, Jacques, has a snake in the plane which is probably against some sort of regulation. I'm not sure. And they set up that he really doesn't like snakes, and it's a funny little bit, comes back later in a big way when he does what?
Gets lowered into
a snake pit. Not very good for him. Okay, so his goal ultimately is to find the Ark of the Covenant, right? Which is one of those. It's an interesting sort of goal because it relies on sort of history and religion and all of these things that many of us have a lot of, even if just passing knowledge of. So it's one of those things where you can kind of just say, oh yeah, he's going to go find the Ark of the Covenant, and people just get it. Which is one of the nice things about characters like Indiana Jones, is they're easy to grasp, which means they're fairly relatable. Which means a wider audience tends to be drawn to that kind of a character. That's by no means all that it takes, but it's a good start. Did I explain motivation properly? You guys get that? Good. So uniqueness. What makes your character unique for the situation that he or she is being put in? So what you typically are looking for is, what are the traits, what is the unique knowledge, the unique skills that that character has that makes them the perfect choice for your story? I don't know what this has to do with Star Wars. Except that, as I found out 20 years later, apparently Luke had midichlorians in him, and that was what made him unique. I didn't know that at the time. It was very helpful to learn that. So Luke, in the case of Star Wars, is the right choice for two reasons. He is the right choice, which I'll get into in a second, but he's also totally the wrong choice. The kid growing up on the farm is completely the wrong choice as the hero to take down a galactic empire. At least he would not be my first pick. I would maybe go with somebody with some military experience. That's part of what makes him unique, is that he's so not the right guy that makes him a unique choice. But he's not being asked to be the guy to take down the empire. Ultimately, why is he the right guy? What is the thing that makes him completely unique in this galactic landscape of people fighting? Anyone?
He has the Force.
He has the Force. Anything else?
He's Vader's only son.
He's Darth Vader's only son. Yeah. Oh, and they're related. They're related, right? Because he's Darth Vader's son.
Spoiler alert.
Forgot my warning. Also forget the midichlorian thing. Trust me, So he has the Force because he has sort of the familial connection to the Force. I don't know why that has to do with family, but it does. It's one of the things they established. And he's Vader's kid, which my 5-year-old doesn't really get that yet. Because he's seen Anakin Skywalker and thinks he's a hero, and I'm like, oh, you are in for it. You make me really angry, I will destroy your Star Wars world. So character growth. Your character has to change or grow or learn something. How many of you were in junior high at one time? Did you come home and watch the same after-school specials I did? Probably not, because I don't think they ever ran those things more than once. But all of those were good examples of a character or growing and learning something. You know, usually when I was in junior high, like I would come home and my mother would come into the room and be like, "What are you watching?" I'm like, "I don't know." But the girl and the guy, they don't get along. And there would be some sort of like, you know, PSA at the end about sex education or about don't bully people at school. There was always that sort of thing. I also learned these from G.I. Joe cartoons. Not to pick up live electrical wires was one of my favorites. G.I. Joe is good. A lot of kids don't know that. So they have to learn. You have to grow. As you get into more refined stories, it gets harder to just pinpoint that. You know, the after-school specials are good because they are just hitting you over the head with that. So it's very easy to pick those lessons out, how those characters grow out. You need, what else do we have? Okay, pumping it up. Pumping it up is, you've got a character, you've got a goal, you've got another character, probably. Your major character, your main character is usually the protagonist. You usually have an antagonist, which is somebody who basically has the opposite goal. It's sort of, it's not that different from political, running. Romney versus Obama. They have either the same goal, and therefore they're competing. They both want to be president, or they have opposite goals, which is what differentiates them. And it's sort of finding the balance and finding the drama in that. One of the things that's always interesting in sort of political elections is when two candidates actually have pretty similar points of view, and they have to find reasons to fight and argue. Because apparently that's like in a debate. If you're going to debate somebody, you cannot agree with them. Do you guys see Old School? Ever see that movie? The debate scene, I love. Will Ferrell just spouts out this awesome political argument, and then the other guys are like, "That's correct." that's how you win a debate. But it's the conflict that creates the drama, that creates the really good stuff. So what is the since I've already spoiled it, what's the big dramatic moment in the one and only Star Wars trilogy? Right. Luke, I'm your father. Why is that such a bad thing for Luke?
Because he's a good guy.
Because Luke's a good guy and Darth Vader's a bad guy. But it's more than that. I mean, this is like a life-crushing thing. Okay. What's interesting here is we all pretty much, I think, just agree that that is like the worst thing and the biggest, most dramatic thing happened. Right? Anybody disagree with that? Okay. We're gonna go with that's right. He just got his hand chopped off. And so you telling him you're his father is worse than having his hand chopped off. Right? But we all know this. I don't want to lose my hand. That would upset me. I think it upset him, but what really hurt was finding out that Darth Vader was his father. It's one of the reasons why that scene is so impactful, is that you chop your main character's hand off, and audiences at that point go, wow, that's rough. And you think that's as low as it can get, and that's one of the reasons. Then you're not expecting something to come in that's even going to make this guy's life a lot worse. They do a nice job in the Star Wars movies of setting up that Luke Skywalker has put his father on a pedestal. His father fought in the Clone Wars. His father was a hero. To find out that your father goes from being the hero that you're trying to emulate, you're trying to become, you're trying to be worthy of the hero that your father was, to find out that he is the ultimate evil in the entire galaxy, that's a rough day. And that's good dramatic conflict. We make a we make a Darth Vader mask. So you press a button for kids, and it has like lines from Darth Vader from the movie. One of them is, "Join me, and together we'll rule the galaxy as father and son." A 5-year-old doesn't quite get it, so I love it because he will say to me, "Join me, and together we will ruin the galaxy as father and son." I love it. Okay, sometimes you're not feeling it, you need some creative starters, and sometimes I do these sorts of exercises just sort of at the beginning of the day. And sometimes I'll do them just in my head on the way to work. It doesn't mean I'm actually sitting down typing something out. And this works for illustration and for painting and for film, those sorts of ideas. So for sort of story starters, I listen to a lot of NPR in the car, like this morning when this drive took 2 hours instead of 1.5. And I get ideas. I start thinking about things. It's not even always an idea that I get. It's just I am told about something I didn't know. Do you guys know Hostess? Hostess is gone.
Yeah.
As of this morning. Twinkies per day. That's dramatic conflict. But there's a story there, right? I mean, what the news is all about, really. They tell us stories. They're just usually really depressing stories or scary stories. But there's a story there. There's going to be a movie. There's going to be like the fall of Hostess movies, right? Because what I found out this morning is they've got 18,000, almost 19,000 workers who've been on strike. There's drama there. It's a strike. There's drama to be had. Why are they on strike? Lower wages, benefits being cut. It's good reasons to strike, I assume. So I just started thinking about that and started thinking, wow, what if I was the guy that Hollywood randomly called up for no good reason and said, we want you to write the screenplay on the fall of Hostess. What would I do? I would go start interviewing people, for one thing. But I would make it a personal story. I would make it about a character with a goal. A mother or a father is trying to feed their family and their wages get cut and then they start going on strike. And all of the dramatic stuff, all of these things that we were just talking about start to unfold as you start kind of going down these mental exercises. Now, I don't know that the character that I would write about actually exists, that all of the events that I might interview people on, I would then sort of graft them onto one character to make for a more simple through line of the story. It would probably be an amalgam of actual experiences from different people, but there's definitely a story to tell there. Does that make sense? Listening to news, listening to friends talk. How many of you eavesdrop on other people when you're at dinner? You do that too? Shouldn't do that. All right, so the other thing is look at 2 or more characters that you enjoy in maybe different media, I should say. That's actually the technical plural. Media, and then sort of think about what would that conversation be like? Or as I put it here, so James Bond, Santa Claus, and the Joker walk into a bar. And that's the start of your story. What does that look like? And as that conversation starts to unfold in your mind, those characters are no longer James Bond, the Joker, and Santa Claus. They become characters that you are creating, and you morph them, and maybe there's a story to tell there. I kind of want to see Santa Claus with that big Joker grin. So that's another sort of exercise starter of what is it like if this character I like from over here and this character that I like from over here that make no sense together actually have a reason to get together. You know what we call this? The buddy movie. Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. If you're as old as I am. Amos and Andy. It's the buddy movie. Lethal Weapon. Buddy cop movie. Even spawned a second genre that's the same thing. The buddy cop movie. So here's 2 more. Take 2 genres that don't typically work well together and mash them up. Go back to Star Wars. Most people think of Star Wars as science fiction. It's really fantasy. The Force. Does that sound like science fiction to you? He's got a sword, giant empire, storming castles, stuff like that. It's really a giant fantasy epic. It's got more in common from a story standpoint and a character standpoint with Lord of the Rings than it does with iRobot. They just threw robots in. They threw interstellar travel in. So instead of going into the mines of Moria, they go to Dagobah, that planet. It's very swampy, bubbles all the time, like a giant carbonated soda. Another one is write down a random name and draw 2 arrows underneath, one going this way, one going that way. They're going away from each other. On one, you just write a goal. And on the other, you write what that character fears. There's a screenwriter whose work I tend to like named Andrew Kevin Walker. This is what he does with all of his characters. He wrote a film called Seven. He's written several, but Seven is one of my favorites that he wrote. And with his main characters, he just wrote a very simple diagram. One arrow, wants to solve a crime, fears that the world is going to hell. And then he crafted a story that was about that sort of solving the crime in some way was going to prevent the world from going to hell. And not solving it meant that the world was really going to hell. It was more about making sort of a statement or a philosophical sort of belief about the world in general. You guys all seen Seven? You know what he said about that? He said that was his love letter to New York City. Apparently he didn't like it that much. So I was the editor, and I pitched, when I worked at Marvel Comics, a small book called Drax the Destroyer, that's the cover of it there. And Drax the Destroyer, have you guys heard of him? Yeah? Okay. That's about right. There's one person here that's heard of it. Not a major character. I mean, I'd like to think he's as popular as Spider-Man, but I'm told that's not true. So he was an older character that not much had been done with him. He'd been sort of forgotten. He was really just sort of the space version of the Incredible Hulk. He was a big green guy that got angry and dumber. And so I decided that I wanted to take a sort of a new stab at the character. So I pitched this idea to the Marvel guys. I said I basically wanted, instead of him being like the Hulk, I wanted to be more like Rambo. He's called Drax the Destroyer. So I figured he should be strategically intelligent when he went about destroying things. And they said, well, what's the story? And I said, well, it's Lilo and Stitch meets Rambo. That got their attention. I'm actually not a fan of the it's this meets that. I actually hate that. But in this case, I used it because I thought it was funny. Just the idea of the Disney movie meets Rambo was pretty funny. But the story told in that 4 issues is really pretty much the story of Lilo and Stitch. It's the alien that crashes down. Instead of it being in Hawaii, it's in Alaska, still a remote part of the town. The destructive alien engine befriends a little girl. And hijinks ensues. Now, in this version, instead of it being funny and sort of cutesy and that sort of stuff, we kill a lot of people. A lot of people get killed. Hence the Rambo part. But it was an interesting way to pitch this, was to take the two things that really don't work very well together and see what you could do with them. And the book sold better than anybody expected, given that one person had heard of Drax the Destroyer, and actually led to greenlighting a major project that we did called Annihilation, which reinvented a whole sort of subgenre of Marvel characters. Collectively, they're called the cosmic Marvel characters. It was all because of this little book that most people don't even remember. But that's just to show you sort of the power of what some of these sort of story starters can actually lead to. And that's pretty much the end of the story starters, because we only had about 20 minutes to talk. Do you guys have Q&A? How does this work?
Just, you can ask them for questions. Just make sure you repeat the question.
I will repeat your question. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question about the importance of deadlines, and you referenced it a little bit, but I find working with creative people, and when I'm creative, your fork example is one, where here you're talking about getting it going, the ideas, but sometimes it seems like with design, having that deadline is really what motivates you. So how important is the deadline to the creative process?
Okay, the question is, how important is the deadline to the creative process? In my experience, the deadline is, for many creative people, the deadline is very important because it winds up being a lot of their motivation. They may not, if they're procrastinators, they don't start until the deadline is about 5 minutes away, like myself. Other creative people, I find that the deadline doesn't really matter because they're just excited to start working. There's a comic book artist named Ron Lim, who is the most excited person I have ever met. When we were at Marvel, we hired him to do what we call a custom comic, which is when another company comes in and says, hey, Marvel, can you do a comic for us? So M&M's had us doing an M&M comic with the Avengers in it. And we hired Ron Lim, and he was stoked. He could not wait to get started. And I was like, wow, that's shocking. But it was true. I mean, and so I didn't even have to give Ron a deadline because I knew he was going to get it in as soon as he could possibly get in. And then there's another type of freelancer that deadlines don't matter because they don't listen to them. And I know plenty of freelancers that don't start until the deadline is about 4 days old. And so as a creative manager, as a project manager, whatever term you have, as a comic book editor, whatever term you want to put on it, a lot of this stuff you have to try and feel out through, it's the first time you're working with somebody, you have to try and figure this stuff out, which is why all of my deadlines have padding, right? You do this too. Yes. Yes. So if you wind up with a creator that doesn't start till 4 days later, well, hey, you've still got 5 days before you actually leave. But then as I grow to trust some of the guys that I work with on a regular basis, and I realize that I can have that honest conversation. I'm not giving you a padded deadline. I don't have the extra time, and that's what I sort of find pragmatically that I have to do, and the importance of the deadline is that, and the importance of the deadline is also I'll set a deadline for myself that if I haven't seen enough work come in by such and such a date, I need to pull the trigger, let that person go, and hire somebody who I know is more like Ron Lim and will jump on it. Even if I think stylistically they may not be the most appropriate person for that project, sometimes you're in a world where you have to get it done. Yes?
You said about pulling the trigger on like an employee or an individual. What about on an actual story? Where you say it's not really coming along, rather than just keep working on it and spinning your wheels when to know when to move on to something else?
So the question is, when you're working on a story, how do you know when to get out or when you're on to gold, right? Well, it depends. For me personally, if it's a story I'm working on, that's something that I'm creating, that I own, then I just keep working on it until I feel like it's sort of to a point where it's ready to go out into the world. Or if I'm writing a comic book where it's ready to go out to the artist to actually start to be illustrated. In the case of something like where I'm working for a company and I'm in charge of, usually I am told, this is happening. It is your job to make it happen. So what you do is you go, okay, I have X amount of time, I have X amount of dollars to spend that allocated to this project, right? And it's up to me to sort of either provide a creative vision or find people who can provide a creative vision for it, who can do it in the time I have, who can do it for the money I'm able to spend. And sometimes the best you can do is mediocre. I mean, I hate to say it, but that's the reality of business, because the people employing me are depending on that revenue coming in. So if I'm at Marvel Comics and all of my projects come out and they all kind of suck, well, that's not actually going to help Marvel in the long run. They may hit their fiscal needs or whatever that they're trying to hit that year. But ultimately, if all my projects go out and they're not good, they're going to find somebody else to come in who can do better with the money, with the time that they have for that number of projects. Does that make sense? So sometimes you put out projects that really aren't that great, that aren't things that I'm really, I'm proud of every project I work on. I mean, I take a lot of pride in my work. I approach every project, even ones where I'm just like, I don't know where this is coming from, with, I try to attack them, try to find something in them that's interesting, of value, and bring that to the fore. But sometimes things don't come together. I mean, I remember one project I did at Marvel, and it's interesting because it's a comic book that actually a lot of fans really liked and responded very well to, but it was something where myself, there were two writers, and there was an artist, and none of us really shared the same vision for what the comic was. It was a fairly hastily put together thing, so we threw a creative team together pretty quickly, and it turned out none of us really, we were all sort of fighting each other creatively. We weren't actually arguing. It's not like we didn't get along, but creatively, artistically, we were sort of fighting with each other, and so none of us actually liked the book we put out. But the fans wound up liking it a lot, which was nice. It was like 2 years later, I reread the thing with that distance to it. I reread it. I was like, people liked this when it came out. I don't know why. And I read it, and I was like, despite the fact that none of us liked it, it actually is a pretty good read. It's just not what I wanted it to be. And it's not what Keith wanted it to be. It's not what Kevin wanted it to be. So that's always unfortunate. The best projects are the ones where you're all kind of on board and working towards a common goal, that sort of thing. So I don't know if that really answered your question. Only a couple of times in my entire career have I gone back to my employer and said, cut your losses now, let's terminate this. And usually I'll say that's only happened 2, maybe 3 times after a project is officially greenlit and there's like a budget set against it. Because at that point, the company is counting on revenue coming back from that project. And it's not an easy conversation to have, to go in and say, okay, that money that you were going to make, you don't want to make that money. That's a difficult thing to say. And you need to be able to back that up with some reason. I remember one project that I backed that up with by saying, this will actually damage the characters that we're trying to actually promote, that it's just not coming together. And I know you want to revive these characters. This isn't the way to do it. Yes, you would actually make money, but then you wouldn't be able to do series 2, 3, and 4. You'd have to wait another year or two to let the dust settle from this before you go back to those characters and try to reinvent them properly. And that they understood that at one point. But does that help? Yeah. Yes.
Like for art students, or like with like dreams and goals and stuff like that, do you think it's like important that, or in a sense, do you think like an age is kind of like important? Like for example, if like let's say it's better to like, I mean, like, do you think it's important like our students graduate and then try to find like their opportunities afterwards, or if like let's say an opportunity shows up during your time in college, like it's best to take it because it could be like part of what you want to do in your life, as like an art student or like a comic book or like people with like dreams and stuff.
Sure. So let me see if I can bring it down. The question is, if an opportunity comes along, a working opportunity comes along, and you're still in school, is it best to take the opportunity or stay in school and finish? Okay. That sort of implies something that I tend to sort of go against, which is it sort of implies that once you graduate, once you get that piece of paper in your hand, that your education ends, which I don't believe. I believe that everything you're working on for your entire career, things that are happening in your home, things that you're reading about and whatever kind of books you read, that you're learning from all of this stuff. The learning never stops, and that creative people who say, I'm the best I'm going to be, usually are the best they're going to be. But it doesn't mean that they couldn't be better. So if that opportunity that comes along, you think you can really grow artistically from, creatively from, or career from, hopefully both, then I think you need to think about that pretty strongly. I had an opportunity when I was in undergrad. I had done an internship at Marvel, and they were talking about potentially hiring me at that point. But that was in between my junior and senior year of college. And I knew that my parents would kill me if I had been offered a job and taken it. So I let them know before I left that I actually wouldn't be interested in taking a job. At that point in time, I stayed in touch with them, went back to school, finished, got my undergraduate degree, went and worked at a Borders bookstore for about 2 years, went back to school, got a master's degree in a different state, still working at Borders and waiting tables. Stayed in touch with people at Marvel that whole time, off and on, and met other people in the comics industry, and eventually, 5 years after my internship, I got a job at Marvel. I was in a better place, having worked out in the workforce and struggled working 2 jobs and going back to school. I was a completely different person after all of that, and I think was much, much better at that job than I would have been had I taken it at that time. But that was me. I had a lot of growing up to do. I was an immature little, I lived in Alabama. Didn't learn much there. I went to college in Tennessee, and I went to the most difficult liberal arts school that I could find. But I didn't have to work a lot growing up. I was very lucky. My parents were together, had good jobs, all that sort of stuff. I didn't have to work a lot. At high school, I delivered pizzas. Not a tough job. I did a lot of camping. So for me, I personally had a lot of growing to do, and that was the right decision for me. And ultimately, I was able to come back to essentially that same opportunity at a later time. But that doesn't mean that that's the right course of action for everybody. And one of the big things that I do with Comics Experience, a lot of it is adult education. It's not an accredited institution. You don't wind up with a degree when you're done, but you wind up with a lot of working knowledge, a lot of experience, and growing quite a bit. And ultimately, I think that's what most people are after. A lot of us, growing up, are told, go to high school, go to college, get a job. That's it. After that, you got it all figured out. I think it was after I got a job that I had to start figuring things out. Does that help at all?
Yeah.
It sounded like no. Last question.
No, it actually.
Sorry, last question.
Okay, so I was curious about like where you're dealing with large franchises and you get these directives from a board or corporate directors and they say, this is what's happening, make it happen. How do you actually deal with briefing those trusted partners to get them on board if it's maybe not in line exactly with what they like to do, or they're coming to the table with different ideas? How do you do this kind of creative steering when managing a large project?
Okay, so when managing a large project and being sort of given directives on how to manage that project, how do you go about finding the right people and steering that project and keeping the creative juices flowing? That's a great question, and it's a good thing as the last question. It would take 10 hours to answer it. But basically it's like this. So usually I'm not handed something that says, we want you to do an X-Men story in which Wolverine falls in love with Mary Jane Watson Parker and dissolves Spider-Man's marriage and then gets married to her and they have 5 babies. Like you're not usually prescribed that level of creative detail. It usually comes more in a sort of a strategic sort of plan. So it's, hey, Wolverine's always been this real, burly, rough and tough guy, and we want to soften his image. And then you go, okay, well, how do I soften his image in a creative way? There are a couple of ways you could do that. And typically, the way you do that with Wolverine is you team him up with a little girl. Usually about yay high. Which provides you to do 2 things. One is you get that interaction where you see that he cares about this little girl, he cares about this kid, he wants to make sure she's safe. It gives him the softer side. The other thing it does, because Marvel never wants Wolverine not to be a total badass, is you can put that girl in danger every once in a while and let Wolverine completely cut loose, and he's totally justified because he's protecting the little girl for whatever horrible thing he does. So it comes more in the sort of the strategic, goal-oriented sort of thing. And so then what you do is you try and find the creators who either have done that type of work or you think might have an interest in tackling a challenge, and that's how you present it to them. And every once in a while you're presented with strategic sort of goals that don't line up with something you've seen a particular creator do. And typically then you call up that creator and you present it as a challenge. Hey, I know you really, really are good at writing anti-heroes that kill a lot of people. But we want to soften Wolverine's image. I think that's a real opportunity for you to show, that there's more to you than just blood and guts. And so you can present it that way. And often I find that I get the best work out of creators when I throw roadblocks at them. You can't do this. You can't take the easy way. I want to see what you can do with this thing. And present them with a challenge, because in my experience, most creative people like being challenged. I find creatively that if somebody calls me up and says, you can do whatever you want, that's when writer's block hits. Because I don't know where to go from there. And there are some creators I work with where I call them up and I say, I want to see what you do with this. And I don't give them a lot of parameters because I like to see how they explore things. And have that give and take, that feedback. And a lot of times that feedback, and this happens I think with anybody, a comic book editor or a project manager, they get so many projects and things loaded on top of them that we forget that we're supposed to be a part of the creative process. And so we wind up being focused on deadlines, being focused on getting that project out the door. We get focused on product. How many of you want to work on product? I want to be a product designer. No, you want to create cool stuff, right? So having somebody call you up and say, hey, I'm working on this thing, I'm not really sure what it is, here are the basics that I know about it, what would you do with it? And giving them that opportunity. At least you provided some direction for them to start. And so really, I think that's it, sort of presenting them as challenges or opportunities, that sort of thing. And then keeping that creative discussion, because a lot of times what happens when I get overloaded with work is Did you do that thing yet?
Do you have a certain kind of like methodology for touch points with your creative teams? Like, I touch base with them once a week on Friday. I get updates, stuff like that.
Yeah. Anytime they turn something in, I certainly respond. I'll look at it, and sometimes I'll respond. I can't look at this for a couple of days or a couple of weeks. That's happened before. But then I'll go back with comments like, I really like what you're doing here. This isn't quite working for me, and so I help sort of steer that discussion and give them direction. And there are some artists. There's an artist I'm working with right now that I can give a project of a single image, like a poster or something, or even just like a small image. And I have learned through working with him that he is going to deliver me something amazing, and it will do whatever it is I need it to do. It'll be amazing, but I don't even bother calling it for 6 months. So there are only 1 in 100 projects I can give to him where I'm not going to lead time. But when it's the right project, and I know that Jose Ladrone is the guy, and I have unlimited time, I will hire him. It just sort of depends on the creative person and on the project. Sorry.
No, that was awesome. Thanks, Rick.
Thank you very much for coming.